Good morning. So today we start with Access. It's completely different. Most of you haven't used it yet, so we're going to kind of start off today slow and go slow for the rest of the semester. All right. Let's talk about the outbox, I suppose. This is the outbox that you see, and in here, this is where we've been getting all the Excel stuff. Well, there's Access stuff in here too, and it has pretty much the same organization as the other one here. The only difference here is there's nowhere, like in Excel, I could just dump whatever kind of notes I wanted to send to you into the workbook and all this stuff. I can't do that in Access. So in this folder here called Assignments, there's one for each lab, and that's what you have to turn in by next week. Okay. It's just a little Word document that, well, I'll just show you the first one. They all look pretty much the same, and they're not that much different from what you saw in Excel. So, but at the beginning of next lab, you have to do the 4 tutorials at the end of, or the 4 case problems at the end of the first tutorial in the Access book. Turn them in. Be sure you name the containers what the book says. It just makes it's gonna make your life easier and my life easier. Now, one difference between this and Excel, these are what I would call extended cases. What you do this week, you'll build on in the next 3 weeks. So you definitely want to save everything you do, because next week you'll just take those database containers that you built and you'll just add to them, and you'll just keep adding to them throughout the rest of the semester. And in fact, the stuff I have you do in lab, you'll build a database container, and you'll want to save that, because next week we'll just pick up where we left off and go forward. Okay, so that's one big difference you'll see in your stuff. Anyway, so there's your assignment. Not that much different than what you've done before, except they're in a new place. And let's see what else is in here. Everything else, I think, the case problems, if again, just a PDF of the case problems at the end of each chapter. It's not the greatest PDF, but you can at least read it and see what's in there if you don't happen to have your book handy. And in here, this is where I'm going to work out of each week. And there'll be stuff for us to do in those. Practice. 2 exams plus a bunch of practice problems for you to do. I'll put last springs in there next week sometime. Get it cleaned up a little bit, put it out there. So I'll give you plenty of practice for the final exam, or the exam 3, I probably should say. And I think, and the student files. The data files that you'll need to do this stuff, again, if you don't have the CD for whatever reason, it's all out there. So all this stuff is in just my ordinary outbox. So it works pretty much the same as Excel. Any questions so far? Okay. The other thing, Mac people. I said this again this semester, I'll say it again today. There is no access for Mac for business reasons, no technical reasons. So if you want to do homework and not come into these labs, you can get VPN installed on your Mac. Well, actually, it's already installed on your Mac, they tell me. And then just run that virtual lab. And then in my courses, there's a little folder that tells you how to set up all that sort of stuff. Basically, what you're going to do is you're going to use your browser to do a remote desktop connection to a machine back in there. And you'll be just like you're sitting in a lab machine. If you've ever done something like TeamViewer, it's the same idea, or any kind of remote desktop. You'll just fire up a PC, a virtual PC, and use that to do the stuff. Okay. It runs a little bit slower than the lab machines, but it's a lot easier than coming on campus. All right, so there's that. Okay, so let me just there's this Access ships with this demo database called Northwind. And people often use it, people like myself often use it just to demonstrate what Access can really do and stuff like this. So I'm going to use that for a few minutes just to show you where all the bits and pieces are, and then we'll get into it in detail and stuff like that. All right, anyway. Some of the stuff we won't get to this semester, like this, we won't get to. I'll close this. Okay, so this is what it looks like. you got your ribbon up here, and it's context sensitive, like it is in Excel. So when you're doing different things, different options will show up and stuff like that. On the left here, this thing, that's called the Object Explorer. As I said on Wednesday, when you start up Access, you're starting up a relational database management system. So now we're in our own little operating environment, and Access is going to take care of a lot of details for us. There's lots of information here. Northwinds is a fictional wholesaler that imports all sorts of exotic foods from around the world, and then they sell them to, local shops and stuff like that. And so they created a database to handle that kind of stuff. Just so you a little background, I suppose. So anyway, the different kinds of objects, tables. This is where all the information is stored. And again, it's organized around entities, different things, like here's one for customers, and here's another one for employees, so on and so forth. Okay, so they figured out the kinds of information they needed, and they figured out, how to group it logically, and they built a whole series of tables. And I don't know, we'll just look at customers for just a second. Okay. So now it's open. It kind of looks like Excel, but it's not really. It's just what's called a table view. And I won't go through it in a few minutes here, but anyway, here you can do stuff with it here. You can look at it. Basically, you hardly ever use this. It's just there for a quick look at the data, maybe make one change or two to it, but generally speaking, you don't do much here with it. Now, this one thing you've got to train yourself to do is, again, it's an operating system. It's a little bit small. This tab is now taking up a certain amount of memory in your computer. And if you have enough of these tabs open, you can crash Access. Okay. So what you want to do is keep that number up there to a minimum. Half dozen or so is probably okay, but if you get, depending on how big the tables are and what else you're doing and all that sort of stuff, you could cause Access to crash. So when you're done doing something with it, just come up to the tab here and close it. And that frees up that memory to do other things and stuff like that. All right. So anyway, there's the tables. That's where the information is stored. You'll look at it from occasionally, but not very often. Where you'll do most of your database stuff are in these things called queries. This is where you can, this is where you pull out the information I want. Give me all the customers from New York, or give me all the customers from Maryland, or whatever, right? And it'll create a little table for all that sort of information for you. A new table, and then you can do whatever you want to do with it. You can use, this is where you would say, if you wanted to calculate people's ages, and you had their date of birth, you would do it here. All the sorts of things that all the kind of action that you want to do generally is done through a query. So you'll have lots of them. They look kind of like this. Where's a good one? Now let's just do inventory. That's what a query looks like. Weeks 2 and 3 in the lab, we'll spend a lot of time dealing with those. So again, here we'll use Boolean algebra. So, and there's that. All right. So then, besides queries, forms. Forms are a specialized view of the data. They allow you to do two things. One is you can set up the view exactly the way you want it to look. So if you've got a printed form, you can make something that looks like that on the screen, so it's easy to go back and forth between the two for like data entry or something like that. I don't know if this one, no, that one's not very. Okay, like that. So in week 3, week 4, we'll be covering forms. And this is a look at one particular customer in there. And of course, if you want to go on to the next one, you can come down here and go through it and stuff like that. You can drop all sorts of information in there. So you can get away from just that table look here, so you can have a much more readable form here. So that's one reason why I use the forms. The second reason is, again, Access, as all databases are, is designed to be multi-user from the start. When you have a table open, in that table view that I just showed you, that prevents other people from doing lots of things to that table. You restrict the utility of that table if you have the entire table open at once. Okay. You're not, so, you know, the things that other people want to do, they're not going to be able to do them until you close the table. So that's another big reason why we don't keep tables open very often. And this is set up to share that sort of information. So basically, you're looking at this one record, this one row in a table, and you can do anything you want to it, but that allows people to pick any other record in that table and do whatever they want to do with it. So that's how we can share. That's why we can have 20 to 100 people working on this, because as long as no two people want the same record, it's not a problem. And if there are two people, then one just has to wait until the other one's done and stuff like that, move on. And you can also, the third reason why you use forms is that you can pull data in from multiple tables. And so it just, again, it's a nice way to present the data or the information in a usable format on the screen for people to use and do whatever they want to do with. And that's that. All right. Now, in addition, there are reports. Reports are when you want to send something to the printer. It's the same idea as a form, but it goes to the printer. And let's try employee phone book. So I just double click on that over there, and this shows up. So that's sort of what you'll see when it goes to the printer. We'll go in, and again in week 4 we'll talk about reports. They're a lot like forms and how you build them and stuff. So if you learn how to do one, you can do the other one. Anyway, that's that, and you can send that out to the printer. So that's in yet another place. Okay. So what all this is showing you, or should be telling you, is that databases are very specialized. And they have, you know, if you want to do something, you got to go to a certain place. Everything, a place for everything, and everything in its place. And so you've got to kind of, you know, it's not free form like Excel. So you have to kind of fall into this. And the last two things we won't cover. Macros are just like the macros that you saw in Excel. You can turn on a recorder and you record your keystrokes and mousing and all that sort of stuff, and then save it and then play it back whenever you want. It works exactly the same way. Modules are when you want to write extensions to Access. There's, again, the VBA, Visual Basic for Applications, a programming language. You can go in and write your own little programs to enhance the capabilities of Access, and that's something we won't touch at all. All right, so that's what Access looks like. All right, so in here, up here, I've got this organized, all my objects in here are organized by type. You can also do it by this way. Whoops. You can organize the objects in different ways here. And then you can see, okay, everything that has to do with customers and orders are here. So there's a bunch of queries here to do that. And here's inventory and push, purchasing, and so on and so forth. Okay, so any questions about Access, so forth? All right, so I'm going to close this one down. Maybe I will. All right, let's start. I'm going to, where'd that go? Oh, it's right here in front of me. I'm going to start, today we're going to build a database. We're going to put, build a database container, put stuff in it, and then the next 3 weeks we'll be using it. So my demo, I'm using this one called the Canisius Canine Clinic. It's a more elaborate example. It's the same idea as the one I was talking about over in Newton. So we start off with Excel, and we're trying to keep track of our clients and the dogs that they own and what we do to the dogs when they come in and all that sort of stuff. All right. Oh, if you want to play along with me, don't open that from my outbox. Drag it over and drop it on your own desktop, because in a few seconds you're going to have to do something that you need control over. So I should open mine from the desktop too. Okay. So here's that spreadsheet in more detail. has more information in it, but it's the same idea here. Right? And we got to the point where we said, well, this doesn't work anymore. It's just too cumbersome to do what we want it to do, and we know that we can build an Access database that does exactly what we want it to do, so we can do that sort of stuff. So anyway, so there's the raw information. And then I went through and I figured out what entities I should have, and I came up with 3, the clients, the pets, and the services that we've performed on those pets. And then I decided, again, each table has to have a unique identifier for each record in the table. So we're just going to create an ID number for the clients. We'll just number them 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. But that'll give everybody a number, just like your G number is yours. Each client will have its own client ID number, and then basic information about the clients. And then over here, each pet, we need to have some way of uniquely identifying each pet. So again, we'll just take the simple way out and just start numbering them, sequentially. And of course, then we need the client ID there so that we can link that back to the client table. And then the services, each time a dog comes in, we'll do, we'll clean them up however. And so we want to keep track of all that sort of stuff. And so to keep track of each one of these events, again, we need some way of uniquely identifying each one so we know which one we're talking about. We'll just use an invoice number, which again just runs consecutively, right? We'll just take the easy way out on all these. And so then, okay, I said, okay. So then with, stop. So then all I did here was nothing more exotic than copy paste, and I just copied the rows that I need, or the rows and columns from each, I said, okay, here's all the client stuff. So I copied that over, and then here's all the pet stuff. I copied that over to a separate sheet, and so on and so forth. So I just broke it up into the entities. Here's the one for the dogs, and then here's one I started for services, and then here. Now this one, just so you know, because an owner brings a dog in, and I could do one of 7 or 8 different things, I can do all 8, I could do 1, I could do 2 or 3, whatever. So I don't want to have a bunch of extra columns here. So the way this is set up is that each row, each record in this table will be one thing I performed for one dog on one a day. So if I cut their hair, that's one thing. If I, do something else to them, that'd be a second event. And so that's why here I don't have any multiple ones, or do I? I bet they're down here. No, I didn't set this up right. Anyway, that's the way this is set up. So if they do multiple things, then it will just cut another record, and it'll have the same stuff in there. Okay. All right. So there's my raw data. And what I want to do is I want to transfer this into Access. So close out of Excel if you're playing along. You got to have it closed before we can do something in Access. Then you're going to want to start up Access itself. It'll be in Microsoft Office Access. And you should get this here. Okay. And there's a lot of, Access is specifically done for the small office, home office, the Soho office as it's called. And they have some templates here for things that you typically do. But there doesn't seem to be one for what we want to do, so we're going to build our own. So blank desktop database. First step is to create the container so that we can dump whatever objects we want into it. So, okay, give it a name. I don't know, you can call it clinic or whatever you want, CCC. Why can't I do that? Oh. Interesting. See that little folder over the side there? Click on that and direct it back to the desktop. Will probably be the best place to put it for now. So pick desktop And then down here, just give it whatever name you want to give it. Okay. All right. And then just say OK here, and then it'll take us back to here. And then you're going to say create. Just fold this thing right here. Click on that, and then you just direct it to the desktop, and then give it whatever name you want to give it. And then you just go create. Okay, so that created the container. So now we have some place to store the objects that we're going to create. Today, all we're going to create are some tables. Okay. So this is just a blank table here. We don't need this, so I'm just going to right-click on it and close it. I went up to that tab. It's a table 1. Right-click, close. Throw it away. We don't need it. Okay. So we have an empty container at this point. Okay. Well, it's not exactly empty because we deleted a table and it's still kicking around in that container. Just like when you're working on your own machine or any PC or something like that, and you delete something, it goes to the recycle bin or the trash can or whatever, and it's there until you empty the trash can. Same thing's happening here. So they're still kicking around in your database container, but you don't see them. So we need some way to empty that from time to time because, again, for marketing purposes, access is limited to 2 gigabytes per container. And so this is taking up file space. So we're going to set up a way to automatically empty the trash can every time we exit out of access so that we're not wasting, we have all the space we can have. So to do this, again, this is a one-time thing, File, Options, and then the second one up here, Current Database. Pick that. And down almost right in the middle where it says Compact on Close, check that box. And what that does is that every time you close out of access, it empties the trash can so that next time you start it up, you'll have all the space available to you that you can possibly have. And then you just say OK, and you don't have to worry about that again. And these things, the databases are going to get fairly big. We won't get anywhere close to 2 gigabytes, but they will get big, especially if you delete a lot of tables. So we'll just do that. And then why is it saying that? Okay, you'll get this message saying it mustn't close it for this to be in force. That's fine. All right. So now we've created a database container. We've prepared it for use the way we want to use it. Now we want to get some data in here. So up there on the ribbon, the external data tab. Click on that. And we're going to want to get some stuff from Excel. Okay, so pick that. Okay, and then you're just going to want to click on the Browse button and point to your desktop. And then that Canisius Canine Clinic spreadsheet, right? And just double click on that or open it. And then you should bring you back to this point. Then you go, OK. Okay. This little window at the top is showing you the different sheets in that workbook. Yeah, to import data from Excel, you have to import it on a sheet-by-sheet basis because it assumes that those are tables. So let's pick the one that says Clients. We'll import the client information first. And then down here in this bigger window, it's just giving you a little sneak preview of what's on that sheet, just to, again, so you can look at it. See, the reason why they do all this is that you can't have that spreadsheet open while you're importing it. So this is just giving you a way to look at it to make sure that you're importing the right data and all that sort of stuff. All right. So that's what we want. So go on to next. First row contains column headings. Yes, it does. Having been down this road a few times before, I know that I'll save myself a lot of time if I go ahead and properly label my columns in Excel. And I did that for us. So then we can just go to next. Okay. Here we can restructure how the data is stored, but there's a better place to do it. So we'll skip this step here. Don't just skip this step altogether. Okay. Every table has to have a primary key. Generally speaking, Access does a horrible job of doing it. So just say no primary key for now. And again, in a few minutes, we'll go in and fix that problem too. But whatever you do, don't let Access create a key for you, because you're just going to have to undo it. Go on to next. What do you want to call this table? And it's just taking the name off the tab in the spreadsheet. And if you want to change it, you can here, but clients is good enough for us. So we'll just say finish. Okay, and then close. And now we have our first table in Access. Okay. We're going to go through these steps again a little bit quicker this time, and we're going to import the next table. So go back to Excel, point back to the spreadsheet again, go to OK. This time, let's import dogs. Go next. First row contains headers, yes. Skip the thing about structuring your data. No primary key. And we'll go to next, and it says, do you want to call it dogs? We'll say finish. And now we have two tables in. And one more time, and we'll bring in services, and then we'll have all our data imported. First row contains some data that cannot be used for valid field names. All right, just so if you get to that point, just say OK, and it'll assign a name, and we can clean that up later. First row contains headers. Next. We're not going to restructure the data here. No primary key. Thank you very much. And services. Finish. Close. Okay. So we have our three tables in. Everybody get those in? So we're all at the same page now? Great. Okay. So that's how you get data from Excel into Access. Pretty straightforward, right? Except it imports it it stores the data in an inefficient manner. So it's again, we've got this 2 GB limit that we're going to kind of have to deal with here. So we're going to go back and we're going to restructure the data to save it in a more compact form so that we can do more things with it. All right. We'll do that, and then we'll stop, and then you guys can work for a while, and then I'll come back. So right-click, pick clients, right-click on it, and go into Design View. Okay. Right-click on Clients, Design View. Okay. So here's a special look at the table structure. Okay. If you want to change a field name, you can just type it in here. Like if you wanted to change that L name to last name, you would just go in there and just type in just something like that, right? So that's how you change field names here. How the data is stored. Double means a very big number with a decimal, which means I don't want to get into too much detail. All right, think of it this way. We're setting aside a certain number of columns to store a number in, essentially, right? And at this point, it's setting aside 64 columns to store a 4-digit number. Something like that, right? Don't worry too much about the math, just keep the concept in mind. Anyway, 64 columns for 4 digits. That means for every time we create a record in here, there's going to be 60 wasted spaces in that database, which means it's going to count against our 2 gigabyte limit. So we don't want to do that. We want to store it with 4. Even though it's only going to be 4 columns big, we just want 4 columns. Okay. So there's the 2 gigabyte limit we're worried about, and second of all, the smaller the database, the faster that it runs in general. So again, if we can, by saving that space, we'll get our answers quicker, and we can do things quicker. All right. So, but it doesn't work exactly that way. Anyway, what you want to here, you can tell it whether you want to store that as text or number or a date, or if it's a currency, the data type here. And we're going to store it as a number because that's what we want. But down here at the bottom, where it says field size, this is where we're telling it how much space is set aside to store each number. So here, on that drop down, you're going to want to pick integer. Okay. This all has to do with binary numbers and all that sort of stuff. Just pick integer for now, and we'll come back and talk about it, okay? Then last name, go to last name, for example. Okay. You can either store it as short text or, well, short text is generally speaking what you want. But that sets aside 255 columns. And nobody that we're ever going to see has a first name that's 255 columns. So again, there's all this wasted space out there. So we would pick some more appropriate, I don't know, what's the longest first name could possibly be? 30? Does that sound reasonable? So you pick some reasonable number in here. So for down here where it says 255, you'd pick, you just type in the number you want, 30 or whatever you think's a reasonable size. Now, there's a fine art to this, because you don't want to make it too short. If we only made it like 8 characters long, then somebody who has a name that's 9 characters long is going to chop it off after the first 8. So you don't want to make it too short, because then you're going to lose information, but you don't want to make it too wide, because then for all the shorter names, you're just wasting space. Okay. Well, like for state, since that's abbreviation, we can, come down here and do 2 and so on and so forth. Okay. All right. Now, you can open that Excel workbook back up. Leave Access open, but just open up the Canisius workbook if you want, or you can just watch here on the screen. It doesn't matter. There's a tab in there called metadata, which is, again, information about information, or data about data. So this is telling us that the customer ID number, CID, should be, data type should be number, and the size should be integer. And last name should be text, and I said 32. First name should be 16, so on and so forth. So this just tells you how the data should be stored. And so we've got all that sort of stuff down. All right. And so on for the other ones too down there. Okay. And then down here, this last one, this type of service, we're just going to store it as a number. And if there's a 1 there, that means we cut their hair. If it's a 2, that means we washed them. And a 3 means we clip their nails, and so on and so forth. All right. So we're just going to store a single-digit number there to represent what kind of service we did. So you'll have that kind of information in here too. Okay. Now, while I'm thinking about it, close that. In my outbox, come on. You don't need to open this right now, but just so you know it's there. In Lab Demo 1, there's this Access Quick Guide. And it has the different data types and explains what's in there. Just a little brief table telling you what's there. And the thing that you're going to want to pertain or really concern yourself with is how big of a number can you store in these different things? A byte is some number between 0 and 255. It's all has to do with binary arithmetic, and I don't want to bore you with the details. Okay, but that's how they came up with 0 to 255, because we're setting aside a certain number of ones and zeros to store each thing. Okay, integer minus 32,768 to a positive 32,767. Okay, I doubt if I'll ever have more than 32,000 clients at my little dog clinic, so that's why I picked integer. Okay, if I'm ambitious and I have a worldwide, dream, then I probably would want to go with long integer, and then I could have up to 2 billion plus customers. Okay. But doing that doubles my storage requirements from 2 to 4. A byte's 8, just so you know, a byte is 8 ones and zeros, if you want to do the math. Okay. Anyway, so if we pick long integer, then we're wasting a lot of space. So those are for integers, stuff that doesn't have any decimal. And then when you get into real numbers, you've got to switch to either single, double, where you can store a huge number. Decimal has to do with rounding, because again, I don't want to get into the details of this, but decimals aren't always like 1/4. They're like, we'll think 1/3 is 0.333333 repeating. How do you represent that digitally is not an easy, well, it's not a hard problem, but it's not an easy problem. Anyway, how do you deal with how many places to the right do you want to save and all that sort of stuff? And so there's that. And then if you're dealing with currency, then you probably want to do with currency, because then it has extra routines in there to help round everything off, so that when you add up all your receipts or whatever, everything comes out to the last penny. Okay. So that's where that information is. All right. And there's some other stuff in there that we'll cover later in the semester. So back into my database container. Okay. And business rules. Okay. Down here. Default value. Every time you create a new, let's pick state, for example. Every time we add a new record to the client table, we get a new client. Then we're going to go to the bottom of that table, and we're going to put a new row in there, a new record in there, right? We can say for the state field, we can give it a default value. So, well, since we're a small upstate New York business, then most likely the client's going to be from New York, right? So we can make the default New York for state. So I pick state here, and then down here, the default value would be double quote NY, double quote, like that. Okay. Validation rules. Same data validation here is the same ideas that we saw in Excel. And that little 3-dot icon off to the right there. And in here you write a formula. You write something like a formula. But can't think of a good validation rule for that one, so we just leave that one blank. But that's where that stuff is. And required field. Every time we add a new client, do we want to fix it or set it up in such a way that they have to put the state in before they go on and do something else? Well, we're obviously going to want them to, whoever's creating that new record for that new client, we certainly want the customer ID number to be a required field. So down here you would do required, and you'd say yes. You may want to make sure, like last name, even though we give them a customer ID number, it would be nice to make sure that whoever creates that new record for that new client puts in a last name and maybe a first name or whatever, right? So that's every time you create a new record in that table, those fields have to be filled in. Okay? Lastly, and then you can play. Primary key. Every table has to have a field or combination of fields so that in that column, each value appears once and no more than once. Okay. customer ID. We're just going to number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, something like that. So all we have to do here then, we've got this up here on the ribbon on the left-hand side where it says primary key. You can just turn that on, and that tells Access that's going to be the primary key field, and it'll needs that piece of information for stuff that we're going to do later on. Okay. And then when you're all done with that, you're going to say close. And it says, do you want to save your changes? Well, yes, indeed, we do. Some data may be lost. Now here, this is where you need to stop and think for a second. Because once I say yes, it's going to do it, and there's no undo. And what it's telling us is that we've reduced the size of some fields, like last name, went from 255 characters down to 30 characters. So it says if we do this, if there's any name that's more than 30 characters long, you're going to lose 31 through whatever. Okay. But since we know it's an empty table, we're pretty safe here. Or not empty, but it's got some stuff in it. But I'm sure that names are no longer than that. I can just say yes. Okay. And then I changed some value validation. It said I'm going to go through and check to see. And if a record violates the validation rule, then it's going to kick it out. And so, again, we can just say yes here, and we're done. Okay. Now, I'm just going to dogs for just a second. So right-click on dogs, design, view. Okay. Well, each pet ID is going to have its own unique one, so that's fine. I'm just going to close that one. And I only had one service per dog, so we don't have to worry about that. Okay. Let me just... All right, now then, this one. Here's the data that's in that table. The invoice number looks like it might work as the primary key, right? Because we're going to name those consecutively, so every invoice is going to have its own separate number. But on each invoice, there could be several different services rendered. Okay, so to guarantee uniqueness for each record in here, we can't use just the invoice number, because if we did 4 things to a dog, it's going to show up as 4 records in that table, all under that same invoice number. Does that make sense? Okay. We can't use the dog name because, again, that dog is going to get however many services performed, so that's not going to give us uniqueness. So we can go through each one of those fields, and we'll see that not one of those fields guarantees uniqueness. Right? Date. Again, do 4 things to them on one date, and so on and so forth. So what we need here is what's called a compound primary key, which means we have to use more than one field to guarantee uniqueness. Okay. So you pick, we're obviously going to use invoice because that's a good start. But then they said, well, what we're really doing is billing for different services. So then I'm going to pick, just hold down the control key and pick services 2 so that they're both selected. Okay. We're not going to, cut a dog's hair twice on one day. We won't double bill them like that. So now we've got a combination that's unique for every record in that table. Does that make sense? Okay. So then after I pick the fields that I need, then I go up to primary key. And now I've created a compound primary key. Okay. And then when I save this, we're all ready to close, save. Okay. All right. So that's 2 big steps. Your turn to do some stuff. Let me just bring it up here. I can put it on the screen for you too, so you can see what's going on. In lab demo, lab 1, there's this Word document called student. It says access student 1. This is what you're supposed to do in lab here today. So I'll pull this up on the screen here for you, so you can see this. Work on steps 1 through 2, and then you guys, when you get that done, we'll stop and I'll cover the last couple of things and we'll be done for the day. All right? Any questions? Okay, now, before you mess with that market database, drag it over and drop it onto your desktop. Don't try to work out of my outbox because it's going to cause you problems. Okay. Yeah.